Imagine living in a world where the loudest voice is mistaken for the wisest, where influence replaces wisdom and popularity becomes the new measure of truth. Now, stop imagining, because that is precisely the world we live in today. A society that once sought enlightenment through philosophy, reason, and virtue has slowly begun to worship ignorance disguised as confidence. How did we get here? How did the human race, capable of such profound thought and beauty, end up celebrating superficiality over substance? Today, we are going to explore that through the lens of Socrates, the man who dared to question everything and paid with his life for it. And stay with me until the end, because the final revelation will completely change the way you see modern culture and your own place within it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, do you think our society still values wisdom, or have we traded it for entertainment? Because what you'll discover today might not only challenge your opinions, it might shake the very foundation of how you understand human progress. Socrates once walked through the streets of Athens, asking questions that made people uncomfortable. He exposed the illusion of knowledge, the false confidence of those who believed they knew when in truth they did not. His mission was simple: to awaken people from intellectual sleep. Yet in our age, the sleep has become even deeper. The difference is, now we celebrate it. The philosopher warned of a time when opinion would overshadow truth, when the masses would elevate those who speak pleasing words rather than honest ones. That time, which once seemed like a distant prophecy, has become our daily reality. Look around. Our idols are not thinkers, creators, or truth-seekers. They are entertainers, influencers, and provocateurs who thrive on attention, not understanding. The ancient Greek agora has turned into the digital stage of social media, where the currency is likes, not logic. But the problem isn't just out there, it's within us. We are drawn to the spectacle. We reward simplicity over complexity, emotion over reason, image over essence. And this is precisely what Socrates warned against. He believed that the greatest danger to society was not ignorance itself, but the illusion of knowledge. When people stop questioning and start believing they already know everything, wisdom dies. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time you heard someone admit, "I don't know"? In Socrates' time, such humility was a sign of intelligence. Today, it's seen as weakness. We are taught to speak louder, not to think deeper. We are told to have opinions about everything, even when we understand nothing. And so we have built a civilization that confuses visibility with value. The more people see you, the more important you must be, even if what you say has no depth or truth. This worship of appearance is exactly what Socrates fought against. He challenged the Sophists, the so-called wise men, who used rhetoric and manipulation to appear intelligent while deceiving others for personal gain. Sound familiar? The Sophists of ancient Athens have been reborn as modern influencers, politicians, and self-proclaimed experts who know how to say what people want to hear. They thrive in the same way, by exploiting ignorance and feeding ego. But here's the deeper tragedy. Socrates believed that ignorance could be cured through questioning and dialogue. What happens when people no longer want to be cured? Our era is not short on information, it's drowning in it. But knowledge without wisdom is noise. We have access to more data than any generation before us, yet we understand less about ourselves and each other. The irony is striking. The more we think we know, the less we actually learn. Socrates' greatest lesson was that wisdom begins in recognizing one's own ignorance. "I know that I know nothing," he said. Those words, simple yet profound, were meant to humble the human ego. But today, they sound almost alien in a world obsessed with self-certainty. Imagine if the leaders of our world, the creators of our media, or even we ourselves, could embrace that humility again. How different would our society look? Stay with me, because later in this video we'll uncover how Socrates predicted the downfall of societies that abandon self-knowledge, and how his warning directly applies to the digital age. But before we get there, let's look at what truly lies at the heart of this cultural transformation, the replacement of wisdom with entertainment. Because once we understand how we got here, we can begin to see why we keep repeating the same mistakes, and perhaps how to break free from them. Socrates believed that a society could only flourish if its citizens sought truth above comfort. He warned that when people begin to value pleasure, status, and entertainment more than wisdom and virtue, decline becomes inevitable, and what he saw beginning in ancient Athens has now become the defining feature of our age. Look around. Our heroes are no longer the thinkers who question, but the performers who distract. We scroll endlessly, seeking stimulation rather than reflection. In a single moment, we can witness tragedy, comedy, and absurdity, all mixed together, each competing for a fraction of our attention. It's not that intelligence disappeared, it's that attention became the new god we serve. And attention, unlike wisdom, does not care about truth. Socrates might ask us today, are you truly thinking or are you merely reacting? Because what passes for thought in modern culture is often just the echo of other people's opinions. We consume ideas like fast food, quickly, emotionally, and without digestion. But the mind, like the body, cannot thrive on junk. When the intellect is fed only with spectacle, it becomes weak, unable to distinguish knowledge from illusion. In Athens, Socrates walked barefoot through the marketplace, asking questions that stripped people of their pretensions. What is justice? What is virtue? What is the good life? These weren't idle inquiries. They were attempts to bring people back to the essence of being human, self-knowledge. But imagine Socrates walking today through our digital marketplace, the endless feeds of social media, the constant flood of commentary. Would anyone stop to listen? Or would they scroll past, looking for the next distraction? Plato, his student, recorded Socrates' belief that democracy could only survive if citizens were educated in virtue and reason. Without that foundation, he warned, people would begin to elect those who tell them what they want to hear, rather than what they need to hear. Does that sound familiar? Because we are living in the very scenario he described. Our public discourse has turned into theater, where truth competes with popularity and often loses. The problem is not technology itself, it's the psychology behind it. Every click, every share, every like reinforces our emotional impulses, not our rational thought. We are conditioned to seek validation rather than understanding. This is how the worship of ignorance begins, not as a conscious choice, but as a gradual surrender. When you stop questioning, you start following. When you follow without thought, you begin to worship. Socrates would have called this moral decay, the moment when society forgets the purpose of life is not to be entertained, but to become wise. Yet, this decay hides behind the illusion of progress. We have faster communication, smarter machines, and more comfort than any previous generation, and yet we are lonelier, more anxious, and more divided than ever before. How can a society that knows so much understand so little about itself? Think about the paradox. We celebrate influencers, but few of them influence anyone toward truth. We elevate those who express opinions, but rarely those who pursue understanding. Our world rewards those who appear certain, even when they are wrong, and mocks those who admit doubt, even when they are wise. Socrates would have been cancelled before he ever reached the court of Athens, not for corruption, but for asking questions that made people uncomfortable. He said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Yet, the modern world is built upon distraction designed to prevent that examination. Constant entertainment has become the new philosophy, and pleasure the new truth. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, hubris, the arrogance of thinking we know better than wisdom itself. And history shows that hubris always ends the same way, with collapse. But here lies a question we must all confront. Is there still hope for a return to wisdom? Can a civilization addicted to noise rediscover silence, the silence where thought, reflection, and self-awareness are born? Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Our culture is the embodiment of that truth. We fill every empty moment with content because silence feels like confrontation. We would rather drown in distraction than swim in introspection. But Jung, like Socrates, believed that the path to healing begins with awareness, the courage to face oneself without illusion. What makes Socrates timeless is not his methods but his mindset. He didn't claim to have the answers. He simply knew that asking the right questions was more powerful than pretending to know the truth. Imagine how our society would transform if people valued humility over ego, reflection over reaction. Imagine if being thoughtful became more admired than being loud. And yet, Socrates would remind us that every individual still has the power to resist the tide. Wisdom begins not with institutions, but with the individual choice to seek truth rather than comfort. You can't change the entire culture, but you can change your relationship with it. You can choose to listen more deeply, to think more critically, to speak less and understand more. That is how revolutions of consciousness begin, quietly, within. Stay with me, because in the next part, we will explore the mechanisms that keep societies blind, the psychological and cultural forces that transform ignorance into power, and most importantly, we'll uncover Socrates' hidden message about how individuals can awaken in a world that rewards stupidity. That insight, perhaps more than any other, holds the key to reclaiming wisdom in the modern age. Socrates believed that ignorance was not simply the absence of knowledge, but a kind of moral blindness, a refusal to see. And this blindness is not random. It is engineered, cultivated, and maintained by forces that understand how easily human beings can be distracted and manipulated. To understand how societies begin to worship fools, we must first understand how power hides in plain sight. Throughout history, those who seek control have always learned one lesson: it is easier to rule the distracted than to govern the wise. In ancient Athens, the Sophists used rhetoric to confuse logic, turning debate into theater. They charged high fees to teach persuasion rather than truth. Their goal was not enlightenment, but influence. They turned philosophy, once the pursuit of wisdom, into a business. Today, that same spirit dominates our media, our politics, and our culture. We no longer sell ideas, we sell attention, and attention has become the world's most valuable currency. Whoever controls what people look at controls what they think about. Socrates understood this danger long before algorithms existed. He saw how easily the human mind could be flattered into obedience. He warned that people prefer the comfort of pleasing lies to the discomfort of hard truth. When you study his dialogues, you notice something profound. Socrates never told people what to believe. He simply asked questions until their illusions collapsed under their own weight. That was his weapon, not anger, not ideology, but reason. Today, such questioning is seen as an act of rebellion. In a world that rewards certainty, the questioner becomes the heretic, and this is how the cycle begins. The powerful shape narratives that keep people entertained, outraged, or divided, anything but aware. The masses, drawn by emotion and novelty, feed the very system that deceives them. What once happened in the Athenian agora now happens in the endless scroll of our screens. We mistake noise for knowledge, trends for truth, and emotion for enlightenment. Friedrich Nietzsche once said that madness in individuals is rare, but in groups, it is the rule. This collective madness is what Socrates saw emerging when people stopped thinking for themselves. When the crowd becomes the judge of truth, wisdom dies quietly. It is replaced by consensus, convenience, and comfort. Think about how easily we are persuaded today, by slogans, headlines, or viral outrage. Few pause to ask, is this true? Is this right? Who benefits from my belief? Socrates would have loved these questions. He believed that the path to wisdom begins with doubt, not cynical doubt, but honest inquiry. He taught that truth is not found in agreement, but in examination. But here is the dark secret of modern society. The system does not want thinkers, it wants consumers. Thoughtful people are difficult to control. They question authority, challenge assumptions, and seek meaning beyond material pleasure. That is why the worship of ignorance serves the powerful so well. When people are busy competing for attention, they are too distracted to notice their own manipulation. Socrates' method, the dialectic, was the antidote to this. He engaged in dialogue, not to win, but to awaken. Every question peeled back a layer of illusion. Imagine if that spirit returned to our schools, our conversations, our politics. Imagine a culture where disagreement was not a threat, but a pathway to understanding. Instead, we are trapped in echo chambers, surrounded only by voices that agree with us. Comfort has replaced curiosity. But perhaps the most tragic part of all this is that we confuse freedom with choice. We believe we are free because we can choose between endless options, brands, opinions, ideologies. Yet Socrates would ask, if you cannot control your own mind, are you truly free? Freedom, he taught, begins within, in mastery of thought and desire. Without that inner freedom, external liberty is meaningless. In one of his dialogues, Socrates compares the soul to a charioteer trying to guide two horses, one noble and disciplined, the other wild and unruly. The charioteer represents reason, the horses, our desires. If reason loses control, the soul is dragged into chaos. That metaphor perfectly describes our society. Our technology, our impulses, and our appetites have become the wild horses. We are pulled by speed, pleasure, and immediacy, but the charioteer reason has fallen asleep. Psychologist Erich Fromm once warned that modern humans risk becoming automata, beings who appear free but are inwardly empty, following commands disguised as desires. The illusion of choice replaces the pursuit of truth, and that illusion, more than anything, is what Socrates sought to destroy. So here is the question that every thinking person must face. Are we living or are we merely reacting? Are we shaping our minds or letting them be shaped for us? Because the moment we stop questioning, we start worshipping. And whoever we worship, whether an influencer, ideology, or false narrative, becomes our new god. Stay with me, because in the final part of this journey, we will uncover the most powerful lesson Socrates left for us, one that can awaken the modern mind from its sleep. We'll explore how wisdom can still be reborn in the age of noise, and how each of us can reclaim the inner power that society has taught us to surrender. The last truth is the most important one, and it may change how you see yourself and the world forever. Socrates taught that the greatest victory is not over others but over oneself. He understood that the decline of a society begins the moment individuals lose the courage to think independently. What we call the age of information is paradoxically an age of dependency. Dependency on opinion, validation, and authority. We are surrounded by noise yet starving for truth, and the deeper message of Socrates is that wisdom does not disappear from the world. It disappears from within us when we stop seeking it. The worship of fools begins when we stop respecting the inner voice of reason. It begins when we outsource our thinking to others, to trends, to headlines, to popular figures who promise certainty in exchange for surrender. Socrates refused to surrender his mind. Even when he stood before the Athenian court, accused of corrupting the youth, he refused to beg for mercy. He said, "I would rather die having spoken in my manner than speak in your manner and live." In that moment, he showed that integrity of thought is worth more than life itself. His death was not a tragedy. It was a message, a warning to all future civilizations. When a society kills its philosophers and celebrates its entertainers, its end is already written. And here we are, centuries later, applauding ignorance while crucifying thought. We have built temples of distraction where the altar is the screen, and the priesthood is composed of those who entertain the masses. But Socrates would not despair. He would remind us that every era of darkness is an invitation for awakening. The same ignorance that blinds the world can also provoke the birth of a new kind of thinker, one who questions, doubts, and refuses to be deceived. Wisdom has always been a rebellion, a quiet revolution that begins in the human soul. Ask yourself, do I live according to my own understanding or according to the noise that surrounds me? Do I seek truth or just validation? These questions are not comfortable, but they are the beginning of freedom. Because as long as you are afraid to confront your own ignorance, you remain a prisoner, not of society but of your own mind. Socrates believed that knowledge was not something to be possessed, but something to be lived. He called it arete, excellence of soul. To live with arete meant to align your thoughts, words, and actions with truth, even when it was inconvenient. In our time, that kind of integrity is revolutionary. It means being willing to stand alone in a world that rewards conformity. It means valuing understanding over approval. The modern world tells you that success is measured by wealth, followers, and fame. But Socrates would ask, if you gain the world but lose your soul, what have you truly achieved? The pursuit of wisdom begins when you stop trying to impress others and start seeking to understand yourself. That is where true strength resides, not in how many people agree with you, but in how deeply you know your own mind. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Socrates would agree. Self-knowledge is the path to liberation. When you begin to understand yourself, your fears, your desires, your illusions, you become immune to manipulation. No propaganda, no influencer, no ideology can enslave a mind that knows itself. That is why the Socratic method is more relevant today than ever. It is the cure for a civilization addicted to appearances. But the question remains, can wisdom survive in a world that rewards ignorance? The answer is yes, but only if individuals choose to keep the flame alive within themselves. Every time you question instead of reacting, you light that flame. Every time you choose reflection over outrage, silence over noise, truth over convenience, you resist the culture of foolishness. You become, in a way, a modern disciple of Socrates. Remember, he never wanted followers, he wanted thinkers, people capable of facing the truth even when it hurt, because the truth does not enslave, it liberates. It strips away illusion and leaves only what is real. And while that may be uncomfortable, it is also the birthplace of wisdom, peace, and authenticity. So perhaps the antidote to our worship of fools is not anger or cynicism, but awakening, a quiet revolution of awareness, a return to the inner dialogue, the same dialogue Socrates began thousands of years ago. The moment you dare to ask yourself, what is true, you step outside the crowd and into your own light. And maybe that is what our society needs most, not another voice shouting into the void, but millions of silent thinkers awakening from their sleep. Because when enough minds begin to question, the illusion collapses. Truth, like light, does not fight darkness, it simply reveals it. So let the words of Socrates echo once more across the centuries. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. It is not a confession of weakness, but a declaration of freedom. It is the starting point of genuine intelligence, the humility that opens the door to understanding. If you've reached this point, it means you are not satisfied with the shallow answers of the modern world. You are part of the few who still seek meaning in an age of madness, and for that, Socrates would call you a philosopher, not one who loves debate, but one who loves truth. So before you leave this video, ask yourself one final question. Am I living awake or am I still asleep among the dreamers? The answer to that question could change everything. If this message resonated with you, share it. Let it reach others who might still be asleep, because wisdom spreads not by force but by inspiration. Subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and remember, the journey to wisdom never ends. It only deepens. Because the true revolution, as Socrates taught, does not begin in the streets, it begins in the mind. Thanks for looking.